Visual arts essays can be quite confusing in the way they give you a range of questions to choose from. Thankfully, there is a strategy you can use to make sure you're staying on the right track. Most HSC subjects like English, geography or history just give you a question and tell you to start writing. Not visual arts. They give you a list of questions to sort through before you even think about answering. This can be overwhelming, but there is a strategy you can use to make sure you're playing to your strengths and are ready to give a good response no matter the questions on the day. As always, you cannot memorize a full essay, but you can use this video in conjunction with an essay scaffold to make sure you're never caught off guard. I will link to that video about the essay scaffold, which is like a choose your own adventure type essay. Throughout this video, I'll be referencing the 2019 HSC exam and also 2 essays, so I'll link to them down below. Firstly, let's have a look at the essay part of the visual arts exam. So it's in the second section after the first section of short answers. As you can see, you'll be picking 1 question from 6 options. The 6 questions are split into 3 different sections. The first is practice. You'll see that these questions focus on the creation process of the visual artist. These questions use words like materials, communicating ideas, or art making. The next section includes questions on the conceptual framework. These questions focus on the artwork and its relationship to the artist, to the world, and to the audience. I'm making this shape because often teachers explain it with a visual, and I will show you that visual. So it's like a triangular visual to explain this relationship. These questions use words like artist, artwork, audience, world, time, relationships. And the last section focuses on frames. These questions focus on the lens through which we look at art, or at least that we look at art in the HSC. And those 4 lenses are the subjective, cultural, structural, and postmodern. These questions tend to be the most complex and difficult to predict. When it comes to preparing for the art exam, each of these 3 sections needs a different essay plan. If you're confused by these sections, you haven't heard them before, or you haven't heard them in much detail, be sure to ask your teacher about it or some friends, because this is very important stuff. Ideally, you should have 3 separate essay plans, but speaking student to student, often people will only have 2, and if you're really running out of time, one is better than nothing. You'll just probably have to stick within the section that your essay plan is prepared for. Get to know the types of questions in each section and play to your strengths. If the frames questions really confuse you, but you are fascinated by the process of painting, make an essay plan for practice. Personally, I had 2 essay plans. I had one for the conceptual framework and I had another one for frames. My one on frames was quite specific to the postmodern frame, but it worked for me. Once you've picked the types of questions you prefer, you can start preparing content. Pick artists and artworks that best support your ideas. For example, Duchamp's ready-mades, where he put urinals or shovels into galleries and elevated them to the status of art, are probably not the best example if your essay focuses on the intricacies of artistic craftsmanship. But the ready-mades would be excellent examples if your essay was on the postmodern frame. Picking the right artists, and not just the artist but the right pieces of their work, is really important to your essay. And of course you should be asking your teacher if they don't already give you the artists and examples in class. I know that some schools do that. You don't have to be limited by that, you can be guided by it. I know that my school did a couple different artists and then a couple different artworks by them we could pick, and then we could also explore by ourselves, use our own examples. Experiment a bit, but also be aware that this process should happen in conjunction with your teacher. Get as much help as you need. You can have anywhere between 1 and 4 artists in your essay. I would say having an essay with 1 artist probably doesn't give you enough breadth, but having an essay with 4 probably doesn't give you enough depth. So I definitely recommend having 2 or 3 artists with a couple paragraphs on each. Usually 1 paragraph should focus on 1 artwork. You can pick artists who are similar, or you can pick artists who contrast each other. Now let's look at structuring the essay. Remember to use this in conjunction with the essay scaffold video that I have linked below. The introduction. In terms of the thesis statement, you can have adaptable ideas for each section. So that's an adaptable idea for practice, another one for the conceptual framework, another one for frames. They need to be different ones because the questions are quite different. And like I said before, ideally you have three, like you have 3 essay plans, or you just have 2. Don't have one, please don't have one, that's not enough. Anyway, an adaptable thesis statement for each section. Let's have a look at an example for the conceptual framework. So the question reads, analyze what it is that makes an artwork valuable. In your answer, refer to specific artworks and other agencies of art. And the thesis. The ability of art to reflect the zeitgeist in which it was made, that is, the spirit of the time, is what allows art to give such valuable and poignant insight into the human experience of the era. Now let's have a look at an example from the frames section. Explore how both art and its role in society are constantly evolving. In your answer, refer to specific artists and artworks. Art and its role in society is constantly evolving as artists respond to the ever-changing world, often aligning with the concerns of their zeitgeists to offer responses to the spirit of their time. Remember, these thesis statements have come from my adaptable thesis ideas which have been applied to the question. If you need some help making sure your thesis statements are good and you're actually answering the question with your thesis statement, I have a video specifically on that and I will link to that one. Next, let's introduce the artists and key points. Try to have the artist and also their location and their birth and death, because context is so important in art. Also, it shows you went the extra mile when preparing for the essay, so that's good. But don't waste time introducing individual artworks in your introduction. In the conceptual framework question, it looks like this. The inextricable and invaluable relationships between zeitgeist and art are evident in the distortions of the human form created by both the Irish-born British figurative painter Francis Bacon, 1909 to 1992, and the Swiss sculptor Alberto Giacometti, 1901 to 1966. Bacon, with his visceral perversions of human anatomy and flesh, and Giacometti, with his attenuated and pockmarked cast iron figures, give important truths about the immense suffering of their context. So you'll see I had the Swiss sculptor, the Irish-born figurative painter, as well as their birth and death dates. And here's a different way of doing it in the frames question. This is a longer introduction. This was particularly evident in the 20th century rise of existential questioning, which brought Dadaism, the artistic anarchy that protested against the logic and reason that brought capitalism and world wars. Influenced by this societal movement, the French artist Marcel Duchamp, 1887 to 1968, began to show irreverence for retinal works that surrounded him, and iconoclastically revolted against traditional craftsmanship to evolve the role of conceptual craftsmanship with his ready-mades. Yet, even this role of art has developed to respond to our contemporary era of growing social awareness and activism, with Duchamp's successes showing a more complex engagement with the visual, emotional, experiential as well as the conceptual. Contemporary Chinese-born artist Ai Weiwei, 1957 to current, evolves Duchamp's use of mass production and iconoclasm to conceptually and visually critique the Chinese political regime. Similarly, Cuban-born and American-based Felix Gonzalez Torres, 1957 to 1996, employs a Duchampian lack of traditional craftsmanship, evolving his practice to affect audiences intellectually but also emotionally and experientially, with his personal response to his post-sexual revolution society. End your introduction with a sentence that addresses the question and brings your artists together. In the conceptual framework question, you probably noticed that it came together at the end naturally, so some essays you won't need it, but in the frames question there was an extra sentence needed to tie it up, and that one was, overall, the works of Duchamp and his successors Art and Torres show that art and its role in society is constantly updating to reflect the nuances of change in our modern zeitgeist. That is the introduction done. Now we can move on to the body. I've experimented with a lot of different essay structures in art, and I've come to the conclusion that a bunch of different structures can actually work really well. It depends on the question, your ideas, and the artists. Let me give you some examples about structure. So in my essay on the conceptual framework, I had that shorter introduction that we just read, and then I had a paragraph on context, 2 paragraphs on my first artist, and 2 paragraphs on my second artist. I had a different structure in my frames question. So I had that massive introduction, which was included context, so I didn't need a whole separate paragraph on it. I just had introduction, a paragraph on my first artist, a paragraph on my second artist, and then a paragraph on my third artist. Then I had another paragraph on my first artist, and another paragraph on my second artist. And my third artist didn't get a third paragraph, there wasn't enough room in the essay. So there was just 1 paragraph on 1 artist. And that's how I kind of worked it for the frames question. So now I know that many structures can work. Let's have a look at the actual paragraphs themselves. Start in the same way as an English essay with a sub-thesis. Introduce the artist. Like I said, each paragraph should focus on an artwork unless you're doing something a bit different. So when it comes to the sub-thesis, make sure you are introducing your artwork, your idea, and connecting it to the question. Let's have a look at an example. So, Bacon's Oil on Canvas triptych in memory of George Dyer, 1971, valuably and insightfully reflects his context's existentially pessimistic view on the human condition, evident in his depiction of a distorted humanity within an indifferent world. And in my second example, Duchamp's evolving of the traditional importance of visual craftsmanship to respond to the existential absurdity of his post-war society was evident in his first and assisted ready-made bicycle wheel, 1913. Next, we get into the evidence part of the essay. So this is the EE in the peel or the teal structure. Let's have a look at 2 body paragraph examples. These works began in Bacon's characteristic style as he schematically divided the canvas into planes of colours, with warm pinks and purples permeating through these works. Linearized house-like settings are contrasted by the fluidness of the figures, the leftmost figure rocking in a distorted fetal position, the centre figure featuring a grotesquely bent arm, and the right canvas featuring a bust dripping out of the mirror it is reflected into. The flesh of each figure, illustrated with reference to photographic source images, has been distorted and bruised, part of Bacon's drive to bypass the brain and communicate directly with the nervous system. Other aspects of the scenes, like the clothing and the house interior, appear undistorted. This stability of the non-human world contrasted with the fluidity of the human form is, as John Berger has observed, symbolic of the suffering that Bacon suggests is unique to the human condition within his tumultuous context. You'll see that descriptions of the artwork are really necessary, and they should be written in a way that helps you prove your point. Key quotes can also be used to help you enhance your essay. So these quotes come from the artists themselves or critics, like I had a quote from Bacon and I had another one from Berger. At the end of the paragraph, link back to your idea and the question, just like other subjects. Now let's look at quite a different example. So you'll see that this paragraph is actually shorter than the one above. So the essay balanced out. Even though it had a really long introduction, the paragraphs themselves were shorter. This is the frames question, by the way. Duchamp challenged the physical and material confines of art by combining a bicycle wheel and a kitchen stool, 2 mass-produced parts chosen for their aesthetic indifference. He argued, although he showed little physical labour in its creation, it could be elevated to the dignity of art by the mere choice of an artist. The 1913 bicycle wheel was lost, but 4 decades later, Duchamp assembled a replacement and radically affirmed that as his artistic concept remained, the later version was just as valid as the original. Recontextualizing everyday objects to items of aesthetic privilege, Duchamp revived the centrality of the intellect, now evident in contemporary art. This paragraph focuses a lot less on the visuals of the artwork because that's just not what the art is about. So you'll see how art essays are really dependent on the concept that you're going for. but I still explain the visual relevance of the artwork and the art making practice, a conceptual practice in this example, to prove my point. For some more body paragraph examples, check out the links to the essays in full below. Finally, the conclusion. The conclusion is just like other subjects. You just want to make sure you're addressing all your artists, the ideas explored, and the question. Let's have a look at a conclusion for the frames question. Conclusively. Well, that's not a word that I usually use when starting conclusions, but it's fine. Duchamp's rejection of craftsmanship aligned with the existential challenging of long-held beliefs evident in the post-war society, as he instead evolved the importance of intellect. A further evolution is evident in the contemporary art of Art and Torres, as Duchamp's legacy sees a more complex engagement with both the visual, emotional, and experiential to engage with contemporary trends of activism, showing art and its role in society is constantly updating and renewing to the subtleties of each zeitgeist. And that's the conclusion done. In terms of preparing for the essay, no memorizing, I cannot stress that enough. And as always, past papers are your best friend. They will help you improve your exam strategy and make sure you're ready to answer any question. Now that we've gone through how the exam is set up, how to structure your essays, and a few examples, hopefully you are feeling more confident about art. Let me know if you have any questions or if you have any other advice, and I hope this helped.